Okay, well, actually, where do you? I mean, one of the don't know the spicy takes that I found of yours from like I don't know, like 6 months ago or something was saying, AI is going to kind of enter a bubble and the bubble's going to pop, which like you could argue that was extremely prescient. I'm not sure like where you feel like we are in like a hype cycle or if you're expecting like a bigger bubble. But it does sort of feel like we actually kind of had a maybe like a peak maybe 2 months ago and maybe we're coming down from there. What's your take?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that in the 90s, this happened with dot coms too. There was kind of like this, it wasn't just dot coms, but it was a mix of like dot coms and other tech, including like communications technology. And so you had this bubble, and it felt like maybe you're getting to a sigmoid, but then and it sort of did another big gap. And I feel like that's probably going to happen here. I think this is like maybe one of the bubbles to end all bubbles. And one of the funny things about it is that in every bubble, sometimes you actually sit there and think maybe it's real, and I think the smartest people after a while are like, I don't know, maybe I should do internet stocks. And I feel like that's exactly what's going to happen here. I think OpenAI will go public. I think it'll be $1 trillion market cap. I think that the bubble will get bigger. I feel like it's possible it all comes tumbling down tomorrow, but I also feel like almost more than the internet, like AI has immediate impacts for a lot of organizations. And the other key thing is that the biggest beneficiary is going to be companies like Verizon and Procter and Gamble and stuff like that, where they're going to be able to like save $1 billion here and there, which is a huge amount for the S&P 500, where they can save some money, deploying AI tools, and maybe they can spend money using products like yours to sort of say what can we do with the data that we do have internally. Really smart companies will pass those savings on to efforts like that. But I think that the internet did that for so many different S&P 500 companies. It's what fueled global growth. And so AI has been fueling global growth and will continue to, make GDP growth go up and productivity go up. And I feel like, that is, that's when a bubble can actually continue to inflate. I mean, I feel like, you know, once you have, OpenAI is a lot of revenue. In the dot-com era, nobody had revenue. So you have actual progress, you have actual product, you have like amazing technological advances. This is sort of the real deal. The big question is, what do investors do about it? And I feel like investors are somewhat sober. You have some of these valuations that look a little bit large, but by and large, like, you know, folks aren't funding, just as a company has, AI in the name. Back then, if you had a dot com in your name, you'd go public. Morgan Stanley would take you public. Today it's not that easy. It's still, you know, the big firms are not just funding anything. They're being fairly judicious about, where they put money to work, whether it's Sequoia or Founders Fund or A16Z. And I think that when you start seeing people get really sloppy, it's kind of like when the bubble has really hit. And I feel like once those firms started like to do like really dumb stuff, which they tend not to do, but even the smartest people sort of get wrapped up into this. I think then we'll sort of know the bubble's really here and going to blow up. But for now, I mean, it sort of worked. I feel like you're closer to the vest on this. You're in the thick of it, but so far, I mean, the valuations that I see for like brand new startups, the founders want a lot, but like oftentimes the investors really do get to make the call. And, I don't sense that it's really, really bad yet. I feel like, 100 times sales for a SaaS fast growth startup is actually fairly rational. So, you see that number kind of thrown around a bit. And, you know, so there's real substance here. I think that one of the problems is going to be, how do you actually take AI and make something real? We're just having like the idea itself is probably not going to do very well. I mean, if you try to say I'm going to do AI for X, that's sort of a recipe for disaster. But I do think that you know really focused ideas and really good teams will be able to do it. I also feel like at the end of the day, like your customer business rules haven't changed. Your customer matters. Your product quality matters. All of those things matter. So like I feel like I do see some companies, and you probably see this too, where they feel like they have a really good engineering team. They feel like they're going to do something really special on the technology side, and they don't connect at all with customers. And they don't do anything. So I feel like that has happened, but I wouldn't call that a bubble bursting as much as it is like, this happened to dot-coms too, or it was like just a misapplication of the technology.
So
So to
your
me,
view is that we're at the start of a bubble. That's a good summary of your.
yeah, yeah, it's so hard to explain, right? Like I feel like in dot-com, there's just indiscriminate craziness. It was like mania. You don't get that mania today. Like it's still very like, kind of rational and sober. When you see something really wild and really like sometimes some like the robotic stuff that's happening right now is a little bit like a sign of like, non-sobriety. And so like if you see like something where, some robotics company with no product, no revenue is raising at 100 billion or something wild, that's obviously bubble behavior. But at the same time, like you sit there and think, it's human labor. I mean, maybe that could be $100 billion, maybe it could be $100 trillion company. So I feel like there's relatively sort of like I don't know that we're even in a bubble. I feel like a lot of it is rational. We'll have to see, but and again, you see more than I do, but Wall Street hasn't had this parade of IPOs. There have been some IPOs where companies have had to temper their expectations from the private market. So I think like to some extent there's like a lot of VC money, and the roles have reversed. In the dot-com bubble, there wasn't much VC money, and companies went public to get the stupid money and to get the crazy prices. Now you kind of get the crazy prices privately, and when you go to public, you have a reality check where it's like, no, Wall Street's not gonna buy that. And I feel like, because the private markets have been disintermediated by these mega sort of VC and growth funds, we actually can't tell, right? Because like the price discovery isn't necessarily there. So you have like a $5 billion company announce it's closing up. And it's like, how's that possible? And it's like, oh, the VCs quit on it, and it actually wasn't worth 5 billion. It's just a mark. So I think that so many things about like the ways you can even detect a bubble have changed. So we'll probably know the answer to this like 5 years from now way better than we know it today.
Awesome. Well, I've kept you over. I want to let you go, but I did have one last question I wanted to ask you. Is just that like I saw you bought the Wu-Tang album. Were you a Wu-Tang fan?
Yeah, I'm a rap fan. I'm from New York, home of hip hop. I think that art, is one of these cool things you could do with art is, uh, and sort of when you make a lot of money, the patronage of art. So many people will buy like a Picasso or Manet or whatever, and say, well, this thing's really expensive. What a trophy, And I feel like if you do sell a startup or come into some money, like one of the best things you could do with it is make your own trophies. And I feel like this is like the coolest thing you could do. Assuming you do anybody would want to do this, but like recently the $40 million dinosaur skeleton was like the most complete, dinosaur like ever found, was sold at auction for 40 million. And it's like, that's something like I could see like a founder like you or like somebody who like had a big success say like, oh yeah, I want the world's like best dinosaur in my backyard, And for me, here is this music album where nobody had ever paid a lot of money for a piece of music ever. And I thought it was a really cool idea that should be explored more because music's so important to us. Whereas like impressionist art doesn't play a role in my everyday life, but like for a lot of us, we have our headphones on, we're listening to music. It's a huge thing for us. So why doesn't Taylor Swift or Drake or somebody like that make albums for a patron, and they get to really channel their voice without thinking about commercial output and just say, I'm going to make the best art I can. And whether people like it or not, it's irrelevant because Elon gave me 10 million to do it. And I feel like that's like, potentially a new paradigm.